Welcome to another episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Dusick. I was the founding drummer of Maroon 5, but I'm now a registered therapist, author, and advocate. Did I miss something in there? I don't know. My co-host Doug had...
You're a speaker.
You speak speaker, yeah. I started adding things to that list, and now I can't remember
now
which
it's getting
ones.
truncated.
Yeah. Well, I'm all those things and more, as you would probably attest to. But my co-host is Doug Maillard. How you doing, Doug?
I'm good. Again, my list keeps getting shorter and shorter too, but I'm proud to just keep it at podcast co-host. That's what I'm doing right now. So,
okay.
I'm good. Yeah, I feel like it's been a while. We had a couple of weeks off from recording. We hadn't seen each other. You took a trip back east, right? You went back to New York for a little while?
I did, and it was really cool. It was a great experience, to be honest with you. I wasn't expecting otherwise, but I made a one-day trip into a 4-day trip just to go and soak up New York, which I like to do at least once a year. And last year it was the same thing. I mean, I went to New York a couple times last year, but I went to NYU to speak to some kids in the music business program there. There was a professor named Jerry Del Coliano, who is a great guy and who I think he found out about me maybe through the MITC or the article I wrote in Variety, one of those things that I've done in the last couple of years. And he had read my book and he just invited me to come speak to his couple of his classes. It went great. I enjoyed it. So he invited me back and I went this last week and God, I really think I got as much out of it, I'm sure, as the kids did. Yeah. I think it was probably helpful for them. But for me, just to really see where the 19, 20-year-olds are at this point in college, the world that they're living in, the music industry that they're headed into, the kind of anxieties and things that they're dealing with. It's a different generation, but in ways, I mean, look, Gen Z gets a bad name a lot of times in terms of like being snowflakes or being very sensitive or overly woke, a lot of these things. Talking to these kids, they're so compassionate. Yes, they're sensitive, but they're living in a world and at a time that is highly volatile and anxious, and I can't really blame them. And what I see is just them being willing to talk about it more, to a willingness to be open and they were so gracious and so accepting of the things I had to say and asked a lot of great questions. So you were talking
about like the business, the music business and how it's changed, and like what were some of the things, the topics?
Well, it was interesting this time. I actually spoke in 2 classes last time, back to back. They were both 2-hour classes. So that was quite a 4-hour slog just up there on stage. Yeah. It was a good practice for me in terms of public speaking. The vibe in the first 2 hours was different than I got so much more comfortable in the second half.
Well, the evening show is always better than the afternoon show.
Right. Exactly. I think if I remember correctly, one of the classes last year was an undergrad class or like a freshman class. And the second one was an older, like, graduate class, but they were essentially more or less the same. It was about stress because the music business can be stressful.
Sure.
And in this day and age, as the Professor Del Coliano was saying to me, he's just seeing a much higher incidence of students coming to him, talking about their depression, their anxiety, even suicidal thoughts that they would talk to the professor about. And just, he hadn't seen anything in it in his 20 years of anything like that in his 20 years as a professor. And so he's really concerned and wanting to create something in the program, in the curriculum that would prepare them for the world that they're going into, because the entertainment industry can be pretty tough. It can be pretty cutthroat and demanding. And so their assignment last year was to read my book and to come in with questions for me. So that was great for me, because I was basically just responding to their questions and talking about myself as much as anyone else. But this time it was different. I appreciate that he is constantly evolving in terms of how he does his coursework. The first class that I just sat in on, I didn't even speak. It was about big tech in music, in the music industry. And I learned a lot just to realize like how different that world is now than it was when I was in it. Just how people consume music, kind of concerns that come up with that in terms of how you, from the business model, which we won't get too far down the road on because it's not topic for this podcast, but it's just a different world, but it also creates different challenges.
Sure.
But then the second class, the assignment that he gave when I was the one that I was speaking in, was he had the students write 2 letters. One was a letter from their current self to their 35-year-old self, and one was from their 35-year-old self to their current self.
Oh.
He had me kind of tell my story. It was not an assignment that they had to read my book. So I talked about myself for 20 minutes, maybe at the top, but then it was about them and them sharing some of their really vulnerable feelings and thoughts about the future, about what their life will or won't look like, about their traumas and reasons why they're dealing with anxiety or depression now. And some of them were extremely vulnerable and talked about, not imagining being 35 years old, not knowing if they'll make it that long.
Oh, wow.
And so it became like a big, I would say a group therapy session, but it was really like a kumbaya kind of just really feeling. There was a wonderful moment where one student didn't want to share. They felt too vulnerable to share their letters. And then after a few other people read their letters, this person raised their hand and volunteered to read.
Oh,
and
awesome.
So it was like in real time, something so painful and vulnerable that they couldn't talk about it and share it with the class and with me in real time. Just the community aspect of people being vulnerable affected them so much that they were able to share. It was great.
Which reminds me, like, it was when you said that the professor said in his 20 years he'd never, seen a class react the way that they are. And there's actually something kind of heartening in that I don't think it necessarily means that things are as bad as they've ever been. Just the same way that we say, oh, there's more kids diagnosed with ADHD than ever before, and everyone's on the spectrum. We're like, well, yeah, what actually it means is that we're more open to discussing that, and people are more open to coming to a professor and saying, I'm struggling with this. I'm having anxiety. I'm even having suicidal ideation. Things like that 20 years ago, people weren't comfortable talking about. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's a harbinger of the end times. It could actually be seen as a very positive thing that people are more in touch with their feelings and more willing to talk about it in a group setting or one-on-one with a professor. So I actually find that encouraging that people are having those conversations.
I agree, and I think it's probably a combination of both. I don't think it's either or. I think that there is a mental health crisis going on, and in particular in the young generation. And I do think that there is probably overdiagnosis of certain things. However, I do see a net positive in that people are more willing to talk about things. We're seeing things coming to light just because we're not brushing them under the rug. I think that is overall an improvement, and I think it's so necessary. Just because somebody didn't say that they had these issues in the past doesn't mean it wasn't
exactly
there, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, like we say, we all could have been diagnosed with ADD when we, in the 80s. Because a lot of us probably were. It's just we didn't have the language for it, and we didn't have the So it's not that there's more now. It's just that we know how to look for it and how to diagnose. So
these conversations. I mean, look, I think, like I said, the kids that I was speaking to. Does that make me sound really old when I refer to college students?
I hate to tell you this, we are really old.
I know
we're old.
Well, I don't know. They're kids to me, but they're grown-ups. I mean, they're really in that moment of transition that is so powerful. I've worked with some teenagers in therapy, and I've worked with 20-somethings, and there's just this big difference between the sort of pride of youth in your teen years when you're defensive about a lot of things, and a lot of times you think you know everything and you really don't know much.
Yeah.
You just have kind of found your hill to die on, something that you think is everything that you have to defend.
I will skateboard until the day I die.
And then you meet these kids in their early 20s, and it's like, well, life, they've gotten a little bit of a taste of life.
Smacked down a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like they've been humbled, but they're just now open for the first time. Like, maybe I don't have all the answers. Maybe it would be helpful to kind of be open to absorb other perspectives. Mm-hmm. And it's there's some great work to be done there. And like I said, for me, it was as meaningful, I'm sure, as it was for them, and something I'll probably continue to do.
That's awesome. Yeah. Especially, being able to find a way to integrate your history as a musician, and it's kind of the same things we do on the podcast when we talk to musicians or actors or artists, it's there. I think that there is a music in and of itself, music and art kind of transcends the head. It goes, I had a directing teacher once who told me, if you ever need to evoke an emotion from an audience, play a song, because music it's cheating. It skips the head and goes right to the heart. So if you want the audience to be sad, play a sad song over a scene, and you don't even have to do the work. And actually, it made me start to think about, I mean, I know like you work out a lot, and when you want to get pumped up, you put on some aggro music or, something that's really heavy. Is there anything that you listen to when you want to just put on a candle and cuddle up and feel like melancholy? Because there is for me. I've got an answer, but I want to know if you have one first, and I'm going to tell you mine. Do you have any music that you always like to put on when you want to feel a little blue and just wallow?
Yeah, there's one song that leaps to mind that is my kind of bittersweet melancholy vibe. And I might get the name of it wrong because I haven't listened to it in a while, but I used to listen to it all the time, and I probably should listen to it today. It's a Bruce Springsteen song on the album Nebraska. I don't know if you're familiar with that album. Nebraska.
I love Nebraska.
Yeah, and it's got that real stripped down vibe. It's just so from the heart. It's just mostly acoustic
harmonica,
guitar.
Yeah.
And I think it's called Highway Patrolman. Is that the name of the song?
I don't know.
Well, the story is basically he's a cop, and his entire life his brother's been an alcoholic and a fuck up, and he gets the call on his radio. It's him again. He's gotten a bar fight, and I gotta go, break this up or whatever.
Look at
and it's like his third strike or something. If he gets brought in, he's gonna go to jail. And it's just this very sad, melancholy sort of realization of like, this is never going to change. I'm not doing it justice by describing it.
It paints a picture. It is Highway Patrolman, by the way. You're right.
Yeah, there's just something about the mood and the vibe of that and his vocal performance and how just, it's just kind of a big sigh, like, oh, God, that's the way it feels like. This is just the way that it is. But I still love him. I still love him.
Yeah.
I don't know why that song leapt to mind, but it was something I used to listen to a lot when I was just in that mood of like, something sucks and I have to accept it.
Yeah. Yeah. And there is something to that. Like in rather than I have to get better, I have to fight through this. It's like sometimes you want to wallow and sometimes you want to embrace that feeling of like, this is where I am today and I don't want to come out of it. For me, it is Phil Collins' Against All Odds.
Okay.
I used to listen to that song. That song, first of all, though, for our younger listeners out there, I cannot overstate how popular Phil Collins was in the early 80s. A short, balding, fat guy from England was like, No Jacket Required was a huge album. He flew on the Concorde. He played Live Aid in London, then flew to Philadelphia on the Concorde and played the 2 shows in the same day. I mean, he was on Miami Vice. He had Michelob commercials. He was the king. So I loved Phil Collins growing up. Loved him. But when my parents got divorced, Against All Odds would just wreck me. But it was almost, I loved it. Anytime I wanted to like have that cathartic, like a cry about my family breaking apart, to hear Phil screaming, you coming back to me is against all odds, but that's a chance I've got to. Even now I think about it. I play it on the piano. I learned it on the piano because I love it. I can't sing it. It's too high, but there really is something about, like I said, leaning into that feeling sometime and singing at the top of your lungs, even if you can't hit the notes like I can't. that is a very therapeutic experience. And so, yeah, I had a feeling you'd have stuff like that.
I'll tell you, I have a very different association with that song.
Really?
When I hear the song Against All Odds, I immediately am taken back to being at bar and bat mitzvahs when I was 13.
Okay.
Because that was like the slow dance song.
Oh, God. What a horrible sentiment to try to dance with a girl to.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I was listening to lyrics so much.
Yeah.
But I actually remembered another song that is one of the most heartbreaking songs ever, and it's from an unlikely source. A lot of people don't know that the Bee Gees wrote incredibly beautifully sad songs before Saturday Night Fever.
Right.
There's a song called I Started a Joke. Do you know that song?
That started the whole world laughing?
Yeah, I started a joke that started the whole world. That song, it's the sad sax song, but essentially I don't know if it's, again, the tone of his voice or it's the lyric or the combination of the two and the melody. They just wrote incredible melodies too.
Yeah.
But that's another one that I'll put on it'll always bring me to the verge of tears. If you've noticed, I don't cry a lot.
And I cry a ton. So
yes. Well, I'm glad that we have that dynamic because I have a feeling it's going to rub off on me sooner or later. I've never been a big crier.
Going to get you to cry on an episode. It's going to be great.
There's probably there are a couple topics that I won't tell you right now. You'll find them out if they come up that tend to bring me to the edge. But that song, every time I listen to it, it's like I well up a little bit. I don't know why. Maybe do I feel like I started a joke and the whole world is
maybe.
laughing.
Oh wow, yeah, you're the sad clown. You are Pagliacci. Yeah, who knows?
Yeah. Anyway, but no, I concur with you about Phil Collins.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what song has recently re-entered my lexicon? For some reason, I don't know why, but I have on every mix I make these days, "Easy Lover" with Phil Bailey.
Yeah, with Phil Bailey Jr. Come on.
Easy Lover.
That's also the song where I found out, because again, growing up in the 80s, I didn't know about Phil's time in Genesis in the 70s. But when you found out that Phil was an awesome left-handed drummer too, and you were like, oh my God, see the video of it? It's great.
The drums on that song are so awesome.
Yeah.
The performance and the tone. It's like John Bonham.
Together. Yeah.
Yeah, the harmonies.
Yeah, you don't have to get me started on a 20-minute discussion. Listen, "Take Me Home" by Phil Collins too. That and then the line where he says, "You don't think that I listen, but I know who." I used to think that about like the classmates who were mean to me. Be like, I know who they are. I'm like, one day I'm gonna rise up and be Phil Collins. So yeah, Phil was a huge part of my childhood. So Phil, if you're listening, shout out.
I think I've gone full circle with Phil Collins because he was omnipresent in the 80s. I remember my older brother Josh was a big Genesis fan, and he went to go see them at Dodger Stadium. And it was confusing to me because I knew Phil Collins more than I knew Genesis.
Yeah.
Because I was like right at that age, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years old when No Jacket Required was out.
Right. And then Invisible Touch came out, which was like the 80s Genesis stuff, but it wasn't, the Peter Gabriel era.
Right. Land of Confusion. That's a good song. Right. So I think I was just by osmosis, I loved that music, regardless of the fact that I wasn't really old enough to even understand why or the context of it. But then as time passed, time wasn't too kind to Phil Collins. I think he got kind of thrown under the bus there for a while in terms of like
soft rock.
Yeah, exactly. But then I think even just relatively recently, like in the last 5-10 years, I've gone back to it and I'd be like, man, that is quite a catalog. I mean, there are a lot of good songs. The production is amazing. His voice is amazing.
Hit. Leland Sklar on bass. Yeah, he's awesome.
I don't know who that is.
he's the guy with the really long gray beard. But you know what's funny? This actually reminds me of a story that ties in with you. Years ago, you and I were at Adam Levine's house, and he was playing us some early demos of some newer songs. And I, thinking it was a compliment, was like, this is giving me like some Phil Collins vibes. I don't think it had the intended effect. I think Adam may have taken it the way that you were talking about his, Phil's more recent attitudes of people thinking that it wasn't cool. And I was trying to be like, no, I love Phil Collins. And so I love this song. I think it's great. But hopefully Adam wasn't offended back then.
That is funny. I
don't know if you remember that.
Now that you say it, I have a vague recollection of that, and it sounds very much, knowing you and knowing
putting
him,
my foot in my mouth, and yeah.
It sounds like something you would say, and it sounds like a reaction that he would have that would just be like,
yeah, I think that he was like, okay. So sorry, Adam. Like I said, I meant it as a compliment then, and I mean it as a compliment now.
Well, I would take it as a compliment now.
Good.
Then who knows? But
who knows?
All right, so we got to get into this conversation we're going to have.
Let's do it.
With our guest today. Our guest today on the show is a fellow named Dr. Robb Kelly. He's an impressive figure. He has a group called the Robb Kelly Group. It's addiction recovery coaching from a neuroscience perspective. He does other things. He has a book out. He does mentorship and guidance for aspiring entrepreneurs as an adjunct to that. But his background is in addiction or addiction recovery because he himself is a recovering alcoholic. He would say he's a recovered alcoholic.
That's
so
true.
Slightly controversial take. Some people don't believe you're ever fully recovered, and he's kind of on that perspective that's newer of saying that you can be. He
very
talks
open about his experiences, right, and his struggles with addiction and things.
Yeah, and he was a drinker and user, and even when he was accomplishing some pretty interesting, amazing things as a musician first, a session musician in London. He's from the UK originally.
Manchester.
Yeah. and then went on to get a PhD in psychology from Oxford. So an impressive guy with a lot of opinions. He refers to himself as the Gordon Ramsay of the addiction world, which after talking to him, I get it. He's got kind of an in-your-face kind of approach, and he's got a brash kind of way of speaking at times, which I'm sure serves him well in terms of his brand as much as his style of coaching.
But I found, because we do get in the weeds a little bit in terms of the medical jargon of addiction and things, but he actually illuminated a lot of stuff for me in terms of, we talk a lot about, addiction as a choice rather than something that we can't control. And he sheds a lot of light on that. So for someone like me who's not a doctor, it was actually very, very enlightening. So.
Well, I'm glad. I thought it was a great conversation, and for me, it was stimulating. I did push back on him on a couple of things, so hopefully he wasn't too offended. But I think that's something that I enjoy about this show as it evolves, is that I don't want every conversation to just be all of us agreeing on everything all the time. I think having a healthy debate is something that can be. It's something we used to be able to do in our culture and not offend people. And I think it's something we need to return to, is to be able to have healthy debates about things. So hopefully that we accomplish that a little bit in this conversation. So you want to share the email address?
Absolutely. So we're well into season 2 here on the Hard to Breathe podcast, and we love hearing the feedback from you guys. We've started to get more interaction, especially through Instagram and stuff. People are asking questions, and we will answer them on the air. I know we said we would, and we haven't really gotten to it. But a lot of times Ryan's so generous with his time that he answers them right there in the comments. So we can't save it because we want to get to it in real time. But if you ever do want to leave us a comment on Instagram, YouTube, things like that, but also at our email at hardertobreathepodcast@gmail.com, drop us a line, like and subscribe, all that good stuff always helps the channel.
And you never know where our topics and things that we want to talk about on the show are going to come from. So, if you have a good question or something that you're dying to hear our thoughts on, it may just make it into the show. So there's incentive to send us an email at hardertobreathepodcast@gmail.com.
I already said that.
Well, I repeated it just because
that's what you're supposed to do, right? Repetition makes,
This is advertising 101, Doc.
Sorry. See, I'm an actor. I don't know business. Anyway, let's get to the interview.
Yes, let's do that. All right. Without any further ado, here's our conversation with Dr. Robb Kelly right here on the Harder to Breathe podcast. Dr. Robb Kelly, welcome to the Harder to Breathe podcast.
Thank you, Ryan. Great to be here.
Excited to have you.
Thank you, Doc.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. And I've been, reading up a bit about what you do and your story. And I'd love to start this conversation with just a little bit for our listeners about your background, your personal story, because it's fascinating. And there's similarities, I think, to my story in terms of how I got into this field as well. So I think we have probably a lot in common to kind of talk about. I know that you were on the fast track to success pretty early on in terms of going on to get a PhD in psychology, but even before that, working in music in London.
Yeah.
And that there were issues with addiction and alcoholism even then. So can you tell us a little bit about that backstory?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I took my first drink at the age of 9. It was on stage in Liverpool, musical family. That was my first drink. And from then on, it kind of was great for me for a bit. But I'm a high achiever in anything that I do. I didn't know then, because we specialize in neuroscience today, I didn't know then what I know now, which basically meant that when you have the addictive personality, you can achieve anything you want to achieve. But yeah, I spent some time at Abbey Road, played with Elton John, Bowie, Queen, all them guys. The money I got that put me through college. So, alcohol, I only started cocaine when I was at Abbey Road. Before that, it was just alcohol only. So I drank every weekend we were playing. And then one day, somebody said, hey, can you cover this session? Strawberry Studios, which is 10cc studio. I said, yeah, sure. It's 90 minutes. I said, yeah. So I grabbed my bass guitar and I got the bus up to Stockport and I went in. It's the first time I've sessioned. I don't know what to do. Anyway, the session's over. We got out in like 1 hour and 10 minutes. And I don't know how much it was, but let's say you give me £500. And I'm like, holy moly. I start getting ready at 3 to pack 2,000 pounds worth of gear into a $500 car to drive 4 hours. It's like, no, no, no. So I've got to, and that's what I did, and the alcohol took off and took off and took off. And, it's all on the internet to see, but I just didn't know what was going on with me.
Okay. So you're in the middle of this career at Abbey Road Studio. By the way, I actually shot a video at Abbey Road Studio, the video for our song Sunday Morning. So that was my one experience there. There's, all the footage to prove it. So that was a lovely, that was Mecca to us to be in Abbey Road. And we were the biggest Beatles fans in the world. Sounds like, you worked with Queen. That's pretty insane. I can't even imagine what that must have been.
I walked across the street at Abbey Road. So we all have a connection.
We know, right?
We all have a connection.
Yeah. We have photographs with that. It was awesome.
So how did it go? I hear that you had a moment, a revelation in terms of your drinking where that kind of started your thinking that led to the program that you have now in terms of addiction recovery, a revelation in terms of it being more of a conditioned sort of response, a thinking disorder than a disease. How do you relate to that moment now?
I was homeless at the time because I'd lost my children, my cars, everything, houses, wife. I've been on the streets for about 14 months. And I was outside a liquor store in the morning. It's like, I don't know, it's like 5:30 a.m. It's snowing. I'm in a pair of flip-flops, shorts, and a vest, and I'm sweating profusely. I know from experience if I don't get alcohol or hospital really quick, there's a good chance I'm going to go into the DTs and I'm going to die. There's this Pakistani shop owner, opens the door at 5:30. He knows me, closes the door behind him, not supposed to serve alcohol. And I don't know why, this one occasion, I got up to the counter, had my £10 in my hand, and I was waiting for, and he put the bottle of vodka on the counter. I give him my £10, and I can't even speak because the alcohol withdrawal is so bad. And I remember putting my hand on the bottle, and this was my reaction. Well, everything changed, like my body, the sickness, the headache, sweat went in seconds. I remember looking at the shopkeeper, look at the bottle, back at the shopkeeper, look at back at the bottle, and went, holy shit, it's not about the alcohol. And that was the game changer for me. Like today, when you look at any addiction, it's 1%. Alcohol is 1% with alcoholism, same with drug addiction, any other addiction. And that's what started me. I was homeless for maybe another few months, but when I got back on track, I had a huge spiritual awakening on the street. When I got back on track, I decided that I would spend the rest of my life helping people that suffer from any addictions, plus their families. It's the big key, the family systems, for the rest of my life. And here I am today, 30-something years on, still as excited about recovery. But then there were certain points in my life, even when I was homeless, I always knew somewhere, somehow, I was going to get off the streets. And when you look at the statistics back home, 97% of people on the streets die on the streets. I remember some guy being stabbed to death next to me for his sneakers. I had to physically fight every day to stay alive. It was no joke, but it was crazy how it came to me.
Dr. Robb, can I ask a logistical question, which we don't have the opportunity to speak to people who have been unhoused and who live on the street. And I think other people have had this curiosity too. People who are addicts living on the street, when it comes down to a bottle of alcohol or a sandwich, and you only have, 5 pounds in your pocket, how do you manage that? How do you manage to fight your addiction enough to say, I need to at least eat a sandwich before I have this bottle of vodka? Or don't you? Does literally all the money and all the energy go towards just feeding that addiction? Or is there some self-awareness of I also have to get enough money to live and eat here?
Oh, this is a great question, Doug. Great question.
Yeah.
So alcoholics are born and drug addicts are made. And this scientific research that we've done, the hypothalamus, part of the brain, which tells human beings to drink water, eat food to survive. Okay? Tells everybody to do that from birth. This is why alcoholism is different to drug addiction. At a certain point, the hypothalamus turns around and tells the alcoholics to drink alcohol only. So when the survival part of the brain is telling us, the prefrontal cortex, to drink alcohol, everything else goes second. That's why I could go weeks and days without food or water. It made no difference. But I'll go one further, Doc, on there. If you gave me a big shot of whiskey It all, not just homeless, any time when I were to drink, and a gun. And you said, if you drink this, you've got to shoot yourself. I'm taking that all day long. Now, nobody understands. Why do we do that? And then when we got back into the science of it and the neuroscience of it, it's my survival brain is telling me I have to drink that to survive.
And not to jump ahead too far, but how is a drug addiction different from that, from alcohol?
Drug addiction has the addictive personality. So alcoholics are born with a predisposition. We're allergic to the ethanol in alcohol. The hypothalamus, basal ganglia, and the amygdala are different. They are broken in the alcoholic. So the first drink, and we are off to the races, okay? Drug addiction, 90% of patients that come to us with a staunch heroin addiction started in the doctor's office. So they have the addictive personality, which basically means once we get the patient well, they're geniuses. They go on to create. We work with A-list celebrities only, right? That's what I do, and the rest of the staff work with guys like me, working class. But yeah, it's a different ball game. That everything you know about addiction and alcoholism is wrong, unless you've heard them before, or some of the guys that are saying the right thing. It's totally different to what you believe to be true. It's what's an alcoholic? I mean, we could all go in the street right now in LA and we could pick 10 people and we go, can you tell what an alcoholic is? And they'll basically say this: it's someone who drinks too much alcohol.
Yeah.
And that cannot be further from the truth.
Interesting.
Now, there's so much that's interesting here that I can relate to. I have a lot to say. I'll try to keep it concise. First off, I think maybe I'm the exception, and I know that that's a very alcoholic thing to say, and maybe I'm the exception to the rule, but that was not my story at all with alcohol. I didn't take a drink and I was off to the races. I actually had a decade of moderate drinking before it became a problem for me. I feel like I fall more into the latter of what you described, of a drug addict is made as opposed to being born with it. Alcoholism didn't really run in my family. It wasn't something that I was drawn to young. When I drank it, I didn't start craving it. I thought it was disgusting. It was just something socially that we did. It wasn't until I had a really bad time in my life when I was feeling really depressed and anxious and discovered that this was a way to escape and a way to self-medicate. So I don't know if that's an anecdotal story, but I just thought I'd share that as an exception maybe to the rule.
No, not at all, because when I set off to the races, I mean, biologically and chemically, it took me 22 years to realize I had a problem. I didn't have a problem. Even when I was homeless, I didn't have a problem. So not instantly. It takes years and years, enjoyment. You can control it, and then all of a sudden, slowly but surely, as the progressive illness builds, then you lose control and the choice is taken away. So I didn't mean actually that's it. I was stuck at the age of 9. No. It was 20 odd years later that I realized that after 14 months on the streets, I realized that I might have a drink problem. So, it's if you can't trace alcoholism back 3 generations, you abuse alcohol, but you may be a drug addict. They're totally different. And this is where people get mistaken. He's an alcoholic around the corner, Johnny, he drinks 2 bottles of. Alcoholism is the only self-diagnosed illness in the world. 10 DWIs don't make me an alcoholic, but it runs 3 generations in my family. When I take the first drink, can I stop? And the answer is no. If I drank now, I'd be gone for 6 months. I'd be in Vegas somewhere for 6 months missing. So I know an alcoholic with the tendencies and the childhood trauma, which is the gateway drug. I kind of know. But you may be the same. There's no alcoholism in there. You might have liked to drink or taken a drink to get out your face somewhere, but drugs are the ones that took you to the different place. Because not many people are real alcoholics and drug addicts. I'm a real alcoholic. Can I take morphine and stuff? Hell yeah. All day long. I had back surgery, morphine, doctors, give it me. Give me them pain meds all day long because it doesn't make any difference to me. I usually come off pain meds weeks before I should when I had a huge back operation. Just doesn't bother me, but alcohol, different ballgame.
Now, Dr. Robb, I respect you and I respect everything you're saying, but respectfully, I have to push back a little bit on some of the things you're saying because they just don't jive with my experience and the things that I've come to understand and believe. Now, some of this, of course, is personal experience. It's not necessarily based on anything that's hard evidence, but I'm not new to this. This is something that I do have a lot of experience with and I've studied myself. I make a distinction in terms of what makes someone an addict or an alcoholic. I agree with you, not about in terms of how much they're drinking. the distinction that I make is it causing problems in your life? Is it doing more harm than good? But you continue to do it anyway. And to me, that could be somebody who has 3 glasses of wine every other night, somebody who has no alcoholism in their family, yet it's making them more anxious, it's making them unhappy, it's a coping mechanism that's not serving them, and they continue to do it anyway, even though it's making their life worse. To me, that's an addict. You can call some of the other stuff we're just talking about is semantics to me. I mean, you can call someone alcoholic, you can call someone an addict. I'm talking about addiction on the whole, whatever the substance is. To me, if somebody has that problem that I just described, or somebody who is in the gutter, just trying to get some heroin, essentially, it's the same problem in my mind. It's somebody who has chosen this substance that's harming them over the things that might actually help them. And they're stuck in that pattern. They can't get out of it. I agree with you in terms of this almost Pavlovian sort of response that happens, because you see this with heroin addicts where they're deeply dependent on the opioid, so much so that they feel like they're going to die if they don't have it. And just the actual process of preparing the injection, just getting the needle out, just heating up the spoon, they get this euphoric release immediately before they've even injected it. This has been studied. This is a true phenomenon that any addict can describe. And I know that for me, I think I fall somewhere in the middle, because there is this new sort of train of thought that you're describing where it's kind of all in the mind. It's something it's not biological at all. And you could correct me if I'm misquoting you. And then there's the old school thought, or the way we have been thinking of it, as this disease where you've developed this physical dependency and addiction on it. I kind of fall somewhere in between there in my experience, because I think that when I was going through alcohol withdrawals, it was a very physical thing, but I was also very mindful of the fact that my mind was making it more complicated, because there was a lot of anxiety attached to it. There was this dependence. This is the only thing that's going to solve my problem. It's the only thing that's going to make my anxiety go away. But at the same time, when I was in detox, my blood pressure was through the roof. All of my vitals were really messed up. You could see my liver toxicity was high. The liver numbers were high. I mean, there were definitely physiological, biological, chemical problems that were happening in my body. But to me, there's a combination between the body and the mind and the spirit, of course. And so I can't really draw these distinctions between the old model and the new model. I think that we do need to rethink the model. But for me, I don't like the idea of throwing out the old way of thinking completely and saying that we've changed the paradigm to this whole other way of thinking. I think that it's all helpful information. I think that the biological dependency is very real in my experience, but the power of the mind is so important to understand in the way that you're describing it. So I am agreeing with you on certain points, but I'm also pushing back. Does that make sense?
I mean, everyone's different. Everyone has their own experience. We're not saying that. There's not old thinking and new thinking. There's a lot of old thinking that still works today. We did our own testing on alcoholics and drugs. We took 3 drug addicts that were chronic relapses, friends of mine, and we asked them when they're going to use again, then call me. But you've got to be a week sober. And that's what they did. They called us, and we monitored them. We put them on a heart machine and wired them up. And we took them to the drug dealer. We gave them money. They went in, they did the deal. They got back in the car. We drove them home and dropped them off. The most intoxicating part of that journey was the drive to the drug dealers. So when I talk about the neuroscience here, it makes us different. That everything else we've tried and tested is exactly what you're saying. It's just today we're cutting through all that BS that we used, like Alcoholics Anonymous. I got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, guys. I don't go anymore because everything's misquoted. We're powerless over. No, it never says we're powerless over alcohol. Stop it. So it's the mindset again. Can we achieve anything as long as the childhood trauma's done? The basal ganglia, which is very, very important, and the hypothalamus, very, very important in what we're talking about now. If we don't heal those, and I'm talking about alcoholics, if we don't heal those, you will repeat yourself and you will keep relapsing. So mind, body, and spirit. The mind is energy, we know that, and the brain is matter. So when you hear mind over matter, we know that you can control this boy as long as it connects with another energy outside you. So when you have the neural pathway change, when the energy connects with another energy greater than you, your DNA changes. So we know the neuroscience to be true, but we still had to rely as we went through it, because I got through with the old. So what I'm saying is a mixture of both, and this new science might not work for this guy coming through because he's not had the same childhood trauma as this guy. So it's kind of a mix and a match thing. So yeah, I totally agree with you.
The ambiguity, not to say that it's not a defined diagnosis, pardon me, is one of the things that I think leads to me, because Dr. Robb, you don't know my story, but my father was an alcoholic. I am not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I'm just a guy who has some of these same experiences. One of the things that's frustrating for people like me who are the family of alcoholics or people who have been hurt and wronged by alcoholics is oftentimes we know the science. We know it's an addiction. We know it's a disease. And there's still a part of me that goes, that's bullshit. You were just selfish and you just wanted to drink more than you wanted to be with your son.
Yeah.
What do you say to family members? And Ryan, this is a question for you too, to clients who still harbor that refusal to accept the reality of, hey, this is an addiction. This isn't 100% this person's fault. They aren't doing this to hurt you. Because there's still a part of me that goes, it's all bullshit. You're just an addict, or you just made the choice to drink. You'd rather do that than be with your family. And this, I'm an addict. It's a disease. I can't control it, is just an excuse to take the blame off yourself. What do you say to people who still have that?
90% are excuses. We've not proven drug addiction to like the hypothalamus with the alcoholic, that is a disease. What makes drug addiction a disease? What makes alcoholism a disease? Well, we just spoke about that. It's a biochemical reaction that we have no control over.
Right.
But drug addiction, but at the end of the day, because they both show up the same and both as hard and both take you away from reality and your kids and everything else that goes, it's the first choice. And now when we get that first choice guy, we have to go back into the history, to the childhood trauma around that. So childhood trauma is 95% drug addiction. Drug addicts become from the childhood trauma, period. We've proven that time. That's why we have a 98% success rate with over 10,000 patients so far. We've proven that, okay? But alcoholics with the different parts of the brain that differ, there's no choice there. There's no choice. Now, we've not really followed up on drug addiction with the brain. That'll come in the next couple of years. But, I'm an alcoholic. I expect to be like this. Well, no. Stop that bullshit straight away. We have to look exactly why do you say that? Because you keep calling someone an addict, man, and they'll act like an addict. You call someone a fish for long enough, they'll start acting like a fish. So the people we hang around with as well, you got to be careful when you go to meetings. You got to go to the right meetings. You don't want to go to meetings where everyone's pissed off and miserable, because the mirroring part of the brain will pick that up. Well, communicative animals, monkey see, monkey do. So you fall into that, I'm an addict, and an addict. Or if you're not taking drugs at the moment, you're not drinking alcohol, I bear to differ. Because the American Medical Dictionary tells us that alcoholic is someone who depends upon alcohol. That's not true. That's old school as well. It's a totally different ballgame. But I think many people do say, hey, look, I'm an addict, I can't help it. And I don't agree with that.
Well, from the therapist perspective, Doc, first and foremost, I would validate your feeling about that. It doesn't matter what caused it. Doesn't matter whether it was a choice or not. The effect was the same. The way that it affected you, it was the same. So from your perspective, the fact that you feel hurt, that you feel that he chose the bottle over his son, is 100% valid, of a thought and of a feeling. And no matter of science or description as to why that happened is going to alleviate the pain that it caused.
Right.
So I think that's important to go through the process of experiencing that feeling and owning it. At the same time, I think we can do two things at once. I think you have to, well, maybe not at once. There's an order of operations. Number one is going through the process of the emotions. But at a certain point, no matter what your parents might have done to harm you, whether it's addiction or otherwise. And even if if there are things that are unforgivable and that you, at the end of the day, are not going to decide to let go of and give them a pass on, it is still helpful to understand why they were that way. it is helpful to have some compassion, some empathy for their experience, and to understand some of the things that Dr. Robb just described in terms of the traumas in their past and the reasons why it may not have been a choice for them. Now, I believe we are not responsible for our disease, that the disease was something that was formed in us beyond our control. However, we are responsible for our recovery. You do have a choice to take those steps and to work a program of recovery. If you're not doing that, then you are making a choice to stay in your disease, in which case I think you can be angry about that. I think that is something that if he was never able to do that in his lifetime for you, then your frustration, your resentment is absolutely valid. However, holding on to that resentment, holding on to that anger is probably not serving you very well.
I mean,
right? So
it's something we've talked about before in terms of the mistakes my parents made that I have new perspective and compassion for being a parent myself now. I realize that I'm fallible and my parents were fallible. So yeah, I do have compassion for that. And that's actually a really helpful perspective to say the addiction was not his fault, but the choice to not seek recovery and stick with it was his choice. So I can still accept that this is a disease that was out of his control, but it was still also a selfish choice to not get better. Right. So it kind of validates my feelings and absolves him at the same time. So yeah,
100%. Yeah, we're not responsible. We never blame families, for what's gone on. It's because my mom and my father did this. It's like, stop already. If you were raped as a child or molested, that is no way your fault or anything to do with that. But what is carrying that for 30 years of your life.
Yeah.
That's what I kind of look at. Is like whatever we've been through with parents or caregivers or anything like what's caused a childhood trauma, which has reprogrammed the brain and central nervous system, whatever it is, it's up to you to go back and clear that stuff up. Because all pieces of childhood trauma can be healed. With we use 9D therapy and stuff like that, but it can all be healed. And I just got my daughter back in my life after 30 years, 4 years ago. And then 2 weeks ago, my youngest daughter called me on the phone after 30 years. So everything comes back, but to blame them, like what Ryan just said, to carry that resentment, it's only hurting me. Mm-hmm. I remember going to a meeting once, and this guy I hated at the time. He always used to cross talk, and I went up to him at the end after 2 years, and I said, "Hey, Bill." He went, "Oh, okay. Do I know you?" He said, "Yeah, it's Rob." "Oh, Rob, yeah, okay, nice to see you." I carried resentment for 2 years about you, Bill. And do you know what he said to me? I never felt a thing. I never felt a thing. Because it was all in my head. It was all my doing instead of getting on with my life and learning from experiences. Like my homelessness now, when I look back, I hated everybody at the time. I was angry. I was, drunk when I look back now at that, it's like a semester at Harvard University. The stuff I learned, the empathy, the understand. I met doctors, scientists, and everything that were homeless. But it's really about you standing up and going, hey, I want to get well and I want to take that first step. And understanding what you've been through, there's no blame there as far as we're concerned, especially with families.
I have a friend who, and I'm not going to name names, so if you're a friend of mine, you're listening, you're just going to have to guess if I'm talking about you, who always thinks that everybody else is out to get him, or they're an asshole, or this guy, or a boss. I got fired from that job because they were, and it's like, at some point, you have to realize you're the variable. All the jobs you keep getting fired from, and all the people who are an asshole, you're the variable that's making. So you got to look inward and say, what is it that makes me so combative and so always feel like everyone's out to get me? That self-realization takes some time in some people.
Well, that's why step 4 and 5 in the 12 steps is making an inventory of your fears and your resentments, and then speaking them to your sponsor, because those are the things that will take you out. If you're holding on to deep-seated resentment and you're blaming other people for all your problems, that's going to come up and bite you in the ass sooner or later, right? Those are the things that drive, the negative thoughts, they drive the behaviors, and eventually will lead you back to the problem behavior of drinking, right? Yeah. So, and fears the same. So whether or not you believe in AA and Dr. Robb, I'm with you in terms of I did the whole 12 steps. I got sober. AA was not the whole story for me. It was part of my story. It was a helpful adjunct to a lot of the therapy I was doing, to the recovery groups I was in that were more cognitive behavioral therapy. And I don't go to AA meetings now other than once a year to get a chip, but I do think it's very valuable, even though when I go, oftentimes it feels redundant and there are things that are said that are, as you said, misquoted or not exactly accurate. It's kind of people just coming in and the the inmates are running the asylum to a certain extent. Sometimes people get up there and spew a bunch of stuff that they heard in therapy or whatever, and it's not necessarily the most helpful dialogue. I do think it's still helpful, and this conversation is reminding me of a very interesting, thought-provoking, but frustrating day I had in graduate school with a professor who was very smart and very talented, but I think just liked to push buttons to get a rise and reaction out of people, because it would create a conversation and then we'd get in a debate that was oftentimes helpful for us future therapists to think in these ways. But the thing that he said this one day, and there were several people in this class who were in recovery, he said, there's the disease model of addiction is very common these days. I don't believe that it fits the medical model of a disease. And the reason why is because, if there's a bottle of booze on the table, you're either going to pick it up and drink it or you're not. You can think about it however you want, but that's a choice at the end of the day. Just don't drink it. And I have a feeling he was saying that just to irritate us and to get us to fight back. But I raised my hand and I said, well, look, I know that's true for most people, but I can tell you that when I was in the end stages of my addiction, I didn't have a choice. That the things that were going on inside of my body and the things that were going on inside of my mind were so deeply conditioned that there was no other choice but for me to eventually, I could hold out for some time, but for me to eventually pick up that bottle and drink it. And he just kept fighting me on this. And the point that it drove home for me, it was that there are a lot of different ways of thinking about this stuff, but we often shoot ourselves in the foot by sticking to things that are technicalities or semantics instead of what's going to help the person who's sitting in front of me. Because for me, if it helps you to think of it as a disease, if you have to say, I'm Ryan, I'm an alcoholic, and think of it as something that you're always going to be stricken with, you're never going to be fully in recovery from, to find a place of surrender and humility and that powerlessness that you talked about in step one. If that's necessary for you, which it is for many, and it was for me, to admit that, then that's what you need. It doesn't matter what the science says. That's what you need in that moment in order to come to that place of acceptance and surrender. It may or may not be true in terms of how we describe it semantically and what the evidence suggests. But in terms of the conditioning of the mind and the defensiveness of the addict, all of these rationalities and denials and things that we go through that keep us in our addiction, sometimes something that doesn't even actually make sense, but actually will cut through that is the answer. So how would you respond to that in terms of it might be a different course depending on the person and where they're at in their particular journey?
Well, we don't have a set program for anybody. I kind of answer it. It's how you turn up, what you like, how you do it. I'm a great believer in whatever gets you sober, gets you sober. But we're talking about the clinically alcoholics who have them parts of the brain missing or that are different to other people. Drug addicts, exactly you said. The only thing I would say, if we go back to AA, and again, I got sober in AA, the book is the most fascinating and intellectual piece of literature ever wrote pertaining to the recovery of an alcoholic, period. But we don't follow it today. We admitted we're all powerless. It doesn't say that. I said we admitted we were powerless. I was at the part, we were at the part, we're not at the part now. So it's little things like that annoy me. But again, going back, if we can repattern brains thinking that I'm always powerless and I have no choice or I do have it makes no difference. It's 1% to do with the disease. If we can attack parts of the brain, because the brain doesn't know the difference between pharmaceutical drugs and real drugs. It doesn't know the difference between reality and false. So if we can take somebody down a path and reprogram and repair what they've been through, like you said, Ryan, who cares? Who cares what they do? I'm all for that. None of my therapists have a program. I can't call my therapist up now and go, hey, how's Johnny? What page is he on? We don't do that because every single one of my 9,000 something patients over the years have each been individually had their life brought into this office, with different criteria. So there's not a fix all. What we're doing for neuroscience is saying, guys, this is what's happening to you. This hypothalamus is why you can't stop drinking at a certain point. The basal ganglia, that's the repetition, strength, and confirms part of the brain. With the alcoholic, it's broken. This is why we can go, if you imagine a clock face, guys. So 10 after we go on a bend down, 20 after we get round, 10 half past we get the wife back, 22 we get the kids back, and at 10 till, for no reason whatsoever, we relapse. Not one alcoholic has ever given a reason why they relapse. They'll give you a million excuses, but not one reason. So when look at biologically and pertaining to the neuroscience, that's what's going on. Now, if we can get somebody to the place, that's going to better their lives, have a fantastic life, great. But the bottom line is you have to have a full knowledge, quoting the book here, right? You have to have a full knowledge of your condition. So you have to know what's going on. Well, I just can't stop drinking. Why? If alcohol is 1% with it, why? And that gets down to the crux of the matter. How bad do you want this? Do you want to get well or not? Because if you don't want to get well, I'm not your guy. I'm not your guy that's going to. I've seen too many people die in this industry, in and out the rooms of lack of information and bullshit that people tell. So if you're hanging around great guys that are in AA, but we never get validated or approved. I don't know about you guys, especially Ryan. We never get validated or approved for being an alcoholic or anything. If we recover from cancer or something, they're shouting in the aisles, we get flowers, we get cards. Nobody validates us. One of the reasons why people go insane on death row is the validation and approval. Nobody ever validates us. And the only way we get that is through our meetings. We've got to make sure what we're taking in. Hang around 9 depressed people, I will become the 10th. That's the kind of deal we look at is, look at everything. Some guy coming in, he's an atheist, he don't believe in AA, he still got sober and has a great life. So I'm with you, there's various ways, but when you look at the neuroscience, that kind of beats everything out there. Not so much all thinking, but normal thinking pertaining to any kind of addiction. I think we just need to change that slightly because the neuroscience tells us different.
Sorry, Ryan. I was just going to say, first of all, let me apologize. The gardeners are here, so it gets a little loud. But one of the things that I love about that, and one of the issues that I think, if I can speak for Ryan, that we often have on this show of like self-help and like coaches who say, this is the be-all, end-all solution to your problem. All you need to do is get off your ass and fix your situation. Is that there are different solutions for different people, even those dealing with the same problems. So keeping an open mind and understanding that just because one technique didn't work for you doesn't mean you're hopeless, doesn't mean you're screwed. Well, I tried the conventional wisdom and I wasn't solved, even if we're not talking about addiction, we're talking about anxiety, mental health issues of all sorts. So giving yourself a pass to say, this didn't work for me, but that doesn't mean I'm a hopeless case. There may be other options.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, that's what I appreciate about people in the 12-step groups that say, take what's helpful and leave the rest, because there's a lot to gain from that process. It provides structure that you're probably missing in your life as an addict. It provides behavioral change and accountability. It provides, community and support and validation and not feeling alone. There's a lot of wonderful things that come with it. And I think that in any situation, there's pros and cons, right? If you're going strictly by the book of what you're describing in terms of the neuroscience, that might go over some people's heads, right? So if you're just talking about it from a medical standpoint or talking about it from a scientific standpoint, some people aren't going to relate to that. So you might have to humanize it in some way or make it a spiritual journey for them and not really go as heavily into the science. The program that I was in at the Matrix Institute on addictions was a lot of what you're describing, Dr. Robb. Yeah, the Matrix. It's now Claire Matrix. It was bought out by Claire. But the Matrix model was a combination of the neuroscience, which was a description of the brain biochemistry of addiction, understanding exactly what's going on. They made it pretty simple for the layperson to understand in terms of the lower brain and the reward system and stuff that's precognitive and cognitive. But it was basically a cognitive behavioral therapy program. It was identifying triggers, changing thoughts that surround the triggers so they don't turn into cravings and use. But again, that was not everything I needed. For me, because I'm such a thinker, because I'm an intellectualizer, and because I do have this longing as a spiritual person that I didn't know I had until I was in recovery, I needed that. I needed the scientific approach. I needed to understand what my addiction was. I also needed to think through it and process the feelings and thoughts that were surrounding it. I also needed that community and that support and this program that allowed me to sort of have structure in my life and walk into spaces that gave me accountability and a path to walk. And then I had my own therapist, and I had other things in my life. I had sober friends that I did things separate from those rooms. So to me, it's a holistic approach. And for some people walk into AA and it gives them everything they need, and they get sober and they have a life of recovery, and they don't really need to think about it more than showing up to those rooms and doing that work. Some people really respond to the science, and that stuff is not going to have any effect on them. They really need to understand it in this really analytical way to wrap their head around what is going on for them and what they can have some autonomy, some agency over to affect change in. So, Dr. Robb, you talked about the family being involved in your program, and it reminds me of something that I experienced at the Matrix, where we had family night. Where it was not part of the program, but just once a week, the families would come in. And something I saw over and over again that was interesting to me then, and it comes up again and again in my work as a therapist, this is not just for addicts and families of addicts, but it's fascinating, was you'd have these people in the program that were in there for 6 weeks or 6 months or whatever, and they've been sober. And then as far as we could tell, they're doing great. They're loving recovery. They're very motivated, but they're complaining the family doesn't get it. They're like, they just keep expecting me to fail. And I can't do anything right. It's like they think I'm still the person I was 10 years ago, and they can't see that I'm in this place of recovery. And then you meet the family and you realize they have 6 weeks or 6 months of experience of this recovery guy who's been going to these meetings and spouting this stuff. They have 20 years of experience of alcoholic dad or alcoholic husband or alcoholic sister.
I resemble that remark.
And it hit me, as much as old habits die hard in terms of addiction, we're also conditioned to expect certain behavior from people, and believing that somebody is changing or somebody is getting better is a big ask. It takes a lot of consistency and time to actually believe that and integrate that into your perception of someone. So I wonder if you deal with that with families and in your program, if they're involved more than that, and how you work with them with that sort of problem.
We found is, again, going back to when I was at treatment, you bring the family in once a week and they would bash the alcoholic, or dad did this and dad. No, that's definitely not the way to do it, because then you've got two sides. Family dynamic repair is like this. So 95% of our work is telehealth. You have to recover in your own environment. That is it. I'll prove that wrong with any person that wants to argue with that. You have to. So what we do is, let's say it's a 7-day-a-week, 1-hour-a-day program here for 90 days. The patient comes on, let's say it's the guy. He's only 7 days. The wife must come on 2 days a week. And anybody over the age of 19 must come on 2 days. Otherwise, we will not take the patient. So here's a couple of things we've proven. When the family comes on board for the right reasons, I'll tell you that in a second, the success rate of the patient goes up by 42% right there. Because what the mums or the wives usually do is they come on, they sit in front and they go, okay, let me tell you, I've got nothing to do with this, blah, 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 blah. Stop there. Stop. You have trauma, possibly PTSD from what's been going on in your house. Yeah, well, it's not my problem. Well, then tell me how you allow your husband to come home 2 or 3 times a week and get into a fist fight with you, and your kids will watch you. That's not normal. You've got to do your work, and the husband's got to do his. So swim to your own life rafts. You're both going to do your work, and then we're going to pull you in together as a family unit. So when dad does come out, or dad does start getting back together, they're all on the same page. Because what we used to do is this: 2 places, treatment, house, dysfunctional house. This house is Japanese speaking. This house is English speaking. So we pick the patient up from the Japanese speaking house and we stick them into a treatment center that teaches you English, because recovery has its own language. We stick him in there for 30 days. Now he's fluent in English. Then what we do is we pick him back up and we stick him back in What's going to happen? It's going to start speaking Japanese again. And that's what's wrong with addiction. But no one's bashing each other. Stop that, guys. This is a family illness, whether wives or husbands like it or not. There's no point in you bashing the husband when what's the point in that? Because when he comes out, he's going to start drinking again. You have to be speaking the same language, both be on, so when you come back together, you both understand what's going on and you both understand how to go forward.
Well, let me just say for the record that wives are alcoholics too. It's not all just the husbands. That's something that it's funny in the original AA book. There's a whole chapter dedicated to the wives, right? Because it's always the man that's got the problem. In today's world, we know it can be anyone, any gender, and so I just had to say that. Well, it's you talk about also dealing with the traumas. Another thing that was interesting to me, at first it was frustrating when I was in my outpatient program, but I came to understand it later, was that we were dealing mostly just with the substance use, the behavior around it, the triggers, the getting 6 months or a year of abstinence under your belt. And I thought, okay, we're in groups here. We have a therapist running the group. I thought this is therapy, right? This is group therapy. But anytime somebody would bring up something and it was a deep trauma, something from their childhood, there was to say, you need to talk about that with your therapist. This is not the place to do it. This is not therapy. And I said, if this isn't therapy, then what is it? I came to understand it later, and you may disagree with this, and I'd love to hear your perspective on it. Essentially, you need to get the substance out of the way before you can deal with the other stuff, because therapy is not going to be helpful when you're still dealing with an addiction, a dependency. This is the thinking around this. And also, you have people that are very fragile. You have people in a room, some of which have 6 months of abstinence, some have 1 week of abstinence. And you come in and you start talking about childhood traumas, which may be driving that person's addiction, and you're liable to send them out into the world after a 3-hour group, triggered, having flashbacks, and no one to process it with, and you're just basically sending someone out into a war zone. They're going to go straight to using in that moment. So there are a lot of reasons why they wouldn't do that in that context. In some contexts, it might make sense. When I was at Betty Ford, for instance, the first month I was an inpatient, and the second month I was doing day treatment, and we did get into some really deep stuff in our groups. Granted, we were all there all day in groups together, and most of the people were living all together in a sober living house. So different contexts perhaps dictate a different style, but do you believe that it's one thing at a time in terms of process? Is that the way you do it, or do you do everything all at once? Do you have to deal with those traumas right away? And if not, when is the appropriate time, and how do you deal with them?
Recovering from alcoholism itself is an overnight matter. I hate this saying that you're hearing someplace, you didn't get sick overnight, you can't get well. That's not true. Even the book says the third alcoholic recovered immediately. But the stuff we're talking about now, the traumas and the past, that's a lifelong thing, So yeah, you're right. Unless they're completely free from alcohol and drugs, go to detox. We send them to detox for 4 days, and then we come out and start working with them. So yeah, that has to be completely gone. But again, guys, it's 1% to do with alcoholism, the same with drugs. It's not the problem. At one time, it was amazing to drink. It was a solution. So yeah, we have to be rid of that. Anybody can stop drinking. Anybody can stop using drugs. We prove that when we go in treatment or detox. Can you stay stopped? No. Why? That's what we're going to talk about. But you have to be clear mind and thinking before we do that. You've got to look at your eating. You've got to look at your exercise. You've got to look at your past traumas, the childhood trauma, and bring it all together over a period of the 90 days. But we can get into, we look at the latest research Gary Brecker and myself have done is this, that 90% of food we buy in the supermarket is bad for us. Rancid oils, I don't even want to go into it, just rancid stuff that we can't take as human beings. So what tends to happen is, dad has heart problems or addiction problems, and let's say heart problems, and the staple diet that he's on, passed down from his father, is blah, blah, blah a week. So what happens is, let's say it's potato. So if you can't methylate a food or protein, there becomes a deficiency in the body. That deficiency will cause addiction, depression, and heart problems. So I come away from dad, I set up my own family, but I'm kind of sticking to the staple food that my dad eat. I have a deficiency because I can't methylate that protein or food. That deficiency causes the heart, and I think it's been passed on. That it's not true. It's biologically impossible. So we've got to take all that into consideration. I hate it when people come back from doctors and from psychiatrists and they've got a prescription for something. And I go, what did he ask you about your diet? Nothing. What about your exercise routine? No. How much sun are you getting? No. Are there 4 chemicals that burn every day? No. And he's giving you a prescription. Yeah. And that's when I knew that the medical fraternity is not playing the game. The pharmaceutical company runs the world, and the food industry gets us sick. And that I ask people this all the time. Have you ever been to the doctor and he's give you a medication that's cured your illness and you never have to take that medication ever again? The answer is no. The answer is always no. So we have to look at that as part of the recovery. So when you come here, it's the whole lot we look at. But like you said, Ryan, it's pieces at a time. If we let the neuroscience, if I spewed up on you with all the neuroscience, I'd be down the road. I'd like, that guy's crazy. I don't want to listen to him. But piece by piece, as we bring them round, even with the validation and approval, especially with girls that's been raped or molested, is they've never been validated for that assault. Back in the day, they pushed it underneath the carpet. When you validate a girl for going through that, or a guy, it's absolutely amazing to watch all that weight come off the shoulders. But we don't do that as a society. I don't know about you guys, but mine, whatever happens in this house stays in this house. You know? That stuff will keep us sick.
Bring this back to make it personal again, as we did at the top for you, Dr. Robb, because you said something that was interesting that we haven't touched upon, and I'm curious to hear more about it. You said that, and I'm going to butcher what you said, but I'll paraphrase. An addict is capable of accomplishing anything. You said something to that extent. Now, you were somebody who's been successful as a musician. You have 2 PhDs. You've created your own program, the Robb Kelly Group. You are now helping entrepreneurs, which seems a totally separate entity to the addiction recovery coaching. Have you applied that addictive tendency that drove your alcoholism and drug use to your career? Has this become a project for you that scratches that itch for you? How do you attest the kind of success that you're having, the kind of drive that you have to get to where you're at and doing this on the scale that you're doing? Is that a part of that process for you?
Yes, I think if I stopped work today, I don't know where my mind would go. So it's just the deep work and the deep research that we've done. It keeps me going because we have something fresh and we treat people every day and everything gets good. But what we found on the way is 95% of our work used to be alcoholics, addicts. And what we did is we went across the years and years and found out more about the brain. The same treatment we use for alcoholics and addicts uses for entrepreneurs, depressed people, PTSD, all the same stuff. Like I used to weigh 356 pounds 18 months ago. So I thought, because it just got away, I've been doing TV a lot, the doctors and all that stuff. I've been on TV quite a lot. I started to put the weight and I pulled off TV. And one day, about 2 years ago, I was 60. And I decided to change that around. Everything else in my life is brilliant. I run multi-million-dollar businesses. I've got a great wife. I've got friends. All that. Got the cars. Got all that stuff. So I've lost 157 pounds using the same neuroscience as we do with the addiction. Because it's not about the weight loss. It's not about the food. You got to look at the food you eat. But most people, you give me 3 plates of food of what people eat that day that keeps putting weight on. I'll swap that around with the same ingredients and the same food, and you'll lose weight. That kind of thing. And I'm down now 157 pounds. So when I say that you can literally do anything you want in the world, we know this to be true. We're the only company in the world, guys, that offer a money-back guarantee if you relapse or if you don't become that millionaire, what you wanted to be when you come in, we'll refund your money. And it's 6 figures a month to come here. We're refunding a lot of money, because we can go on. I used to say this to people years ago. You can be anybody you want to be. And the smart ones used to snap back. Well, I can't be president of the United States. Let's forget your political views for a second, please, everybody. We had a freaking business and run the country with no political experience whatsoever. Don't dare tell me that you can't achieve your dreams. It's just not true. In actual fact, I want to apologize to you because somebody's put that there. Somewhere, somebody has said to you, you'll never be blonde enough, tall enough, thin enough, or rich enough. And when you're getting stuff like that and that little computer in your head, if you're getting that every single day of your parents or caregivers, guess what? You're going to end up that way. A girl growing up 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, sees dad coming home 2 or 3 times a week bashes mom, fist fight. Next day, I love you, I love you. She begins to think that's love. So when she leaves the house, proven again by research from us, she will attract the same guy that ends up beating her and ends up being an alcoholic. It's the weirdest thing, to the extent that if she finds a great guy who treats her well, she will self-sabotage that relationship because she doesn't feel worthy. And everybody suffers from the imposter syndrome of not being worthy. And it's just not true. It's here. It's not true. You are 50% more attractive than you think you are. You're probably 30% more intelligent than you think you are. People do all, you get the girls in the mirror in the morning, look at them, you see all your blemishes. All that. That's not how the world sees you. When's the last time you went to the office? Hey, Jimmy, we don't do that. Right. So when you stand 6 feet away from the mirror, all the blemishes disappear. That's how people see you. Well, with that confidence, that changes my outlook on the day. It's small little things that we implant in the brain, sometimes subliminally, 70%, and the other, the talk therapy and the 9D therapy and all that stuff that we use today, brings you to a point that you find your true identity. There's so many people out there that do not know their identity. And it's a crime not to do that. So my advice to anybody, find out what you're good at, find out your passion. Let's say it's making socks. Make a pair of socks, get yourself a website and a business card. You'll sell a pair of socks every month. Then it'll be 10 pair, 50 pair, 100 pair. And keep doing that until you can leave your full-time job and move into that. Because I'll tell you something for a fact over my 30 years. We think we have time, but we don't. Most of the people that we sat down in hospital all said kind of the same thing. I thought I had more time. You don't have time, guys. Marry that girl, buy that house, start that business. Do it today. Otherwise, you'll end up being 80 looking back and going, oh my God, I wish I. Oh, no way.
It's a great message to sort of take us home on, because we've gotten through a lot of technical and medical stuff today, but I love the underlying sentiment of you can do it, you can achieve it. I want to ask one last question because I know we're almost out of time, and I appreciate all the time you've given us, Dr. Robb. I think Ryan and I would be remiss as two musicians if we didn't ask for a story or two from. I mean, if you're working with Queen and Elton John at Abbey Road and things, you got to have some great story that you can tell, an anecdote of those times when something crazy happened. Anything that comes to mind for you?
We're in Abbey Road about 2 a.m. and this was never heard, but apparently they do it on the sightseeing buses in London now. But we're at the studio. There was me, Elton John, a few of his guys, some women, some other guys, sound engineers, and it's lightning. And when we're going back to 80s, it's lightning and thundering. It's horrible, and every now and again the electricity will go off, and it took a millisecond for it to kick in again with the generators. And after about 6 times, Elton said, "Come on, we're going back." So we went back to the penthouse. He was staying at the Savoy Hotel, most exclusive hotel in the world at the time. Now we all go upstairs. There's lots of paraphernalia, lots of alcohol. We're all drinking. Everyone's, women it and all so on. The next minute I heard Elton screaming from the bedroom, and he's annoyed at somebody. So I'm going in. I want to find out what's going on here. So we're going. He's on the telephone, and he's screaming at the manager, and he's telling him that if he doesn't stop the wind and the rain immediately, he would never book into this hotel ever again. True story. That's the madness I was in. Yeah,
that's awesome. That's the best writer story I've heard. That's better than brown M&Ms. Stop the wind and the rain.
Elton requires no wind or rain when performing.
Please stop it now. They brought Stevie Wonder on the plane once to sing Happy Birthday. And he was so pissed at the time, he stayed in the bedroom on the plane and wouldn't come out. And it was a surprise. And it's like one of your favourite singers, and he wouldn't come out. And they had to pay him off and take him home, apparently. But yeah, gets in. And if you listen to this, Elton, I'm sorry, I've not heard from you for 2 years. So
Elton is a big listener. He's a big fan of the show. So
there you go. So I had to tell that. But yeah, he has the best person in the world I've ever met, even currently with all the people I work with, Freddie Mercury. And again, The worst person was Elton John, with the greatest love and smile on my face as I say that. But yeah, I've been blessed enough to live the life I live and carry on through life. And I'm 63 today, and I'm never, ever, ever going to retire. Because I love what I do, because I do what I love.
Well, it's an inspiring story, and it sounds like a hell of a life lived. Where can our listeners find out more about your programs and things like that? Where can people find you?
So if you're listening, guys, and not watching, I spell my name with 2 B's, ROBBKELLY.com, or just put Dr. Robb Kelly in any search engine, or come friend us, Facebook and all that. What I don't do is do these shows for work. You'll never see me, selling my work. Don't need it. Don't want it. Thank you. But if I can help in any way, and remember, there's a book out there. If you want it, go find it. But don't buy it on Amazon. Send me a message on social media. I'll sign it. I'll pay for the shipping as long as it's all free, as long as you go out there. And one last thing I want to say is people need to put their money where their mouth is. You see all these gurus on stage telling you you're going to be a millionaire. No one's a millionaire. So listen, guys, if you're sat at home, like we've all talked about today, if you're in a 1-bedroom apartment and your partner's left you and they've taken the children off you and you think that's it, you think this is it, 214-600-0210 is my personal cell phone number. And here's what's going to happen. I'm doing this on Joe Rogan again. So this is what's going to happen, guys. You're going to text me, please, and tell me that you're in trouble or you're going through this or you're suicidal. I will text you back within the hour. And I'll arrange a 15-minute pep talk that will change your life. And you know, if it doesn't, guys, I'm going to send you $100 for wasting your time.
Okay. Right. I'm keeping that number because I've had some bad days lately. So
money where the mouth is. You know, it's just like I was that guy. You know, I was that guy in the trenches. And a guy called Derek saved me on the streets. I just want to be everyone's Derek. And I overstretched myself. And but at the end of the day, I'd rather you bother me with a text than hear of your suicide next week, because we never know what people are going through. Quick story: guy goes Golden Gate Bridge, throws himself off, commits suicide. The police pull him out. They go back to his apartment. They found his ID. They're looking for next of kin, but what they find is a note on the kitchen table, and it read, "I'm going to go to the Golden Gate Bridge and throw myself off and commit suicide, unless on my way there, an hour's walk, if somebody smiles at me, nods at me, says good morning, I will stop right there, I will turn around, and I'll try again tomorrow." So my last question to the audience is, how many people have you walked past today that's heading to the Golden Gate Bridge?
That's powerful. That's absolutely... I try to think about that. I think having become a therapist, I'm more mindful of that, that everyone has a story. Everyone has something they're going through in that day. Mm-hmm. And if we think about it in that way, we have a little bit more compassion for the person who cuts us off on the freeway or the person who doesn't show a lot of grace in line at the grocery store. We're all in this together. So that definitely resonates with me. Thank you, Dr. Robb. This has been a very interesting conversation. And I commend you for, kind of sparring with me a little bit. This was really interesting and helpful in terms of just kind of talking through some of this stuff. And I appreciate you giving us your time. This has been another wonderful conversation here on the Harder to Breathe podcast. We have new episodes that drop every Tuesday. If you're listening to this, we're on every audio platform, and video is on YouTube if you haven't seen that.
Anything else? Take a look at Dr. Robb's glasses, because they're a sight to be seen.
These, don't forget these, babies.
And the guns too, yeah. Thanks, Dr. Robb.
Thank you, guys.
All right, we'll see you next week on the Harder to Breathe podcast.